Call to order this February 10th, 2025 meeting of the Chelmsford Select Board, and notify everyone that Chelmsford Telemedia is broadcasting this meeting live and recording it for later viewing. If you would join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And I'll just also note that Select Board member Pat Maloney is unable to join us this evening. So we'll do public service announcements.
Sure. So first, from the town clerk's office, we have an announcement regarding the 2025 annual town census. It's coming soon, and responding to the census maintains your voter status, provides proof of residency, and helps us provide better services to you. And if you have no changes to your household, you can respond online. Also from the clerk's office, 2025 dog licensing has begun. You can license in person, online, or complete the application that can be found on the town clerk's webpage and return it by mail. You must have current proof of rabies vaccination, and you must license by February 28th, 2025 to avoid late fees. For more information, you can contact the clerk's office at 978-250-5205. We have a bunch of announcements from the Chelmsford Health Department regarding some upcoming events. Every second Friday of the month from 7 to 10 p.m. at the Chelmsford Center for the Arts, there is sober karaoke. Admission is free, and snacks and mocktails are available for purchase. Also from the Health Department, we have opioid overdose response training, and that will be held on February 19th from 3 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. at the Chelmsford Town Hall in the fire training room. And the class is appropriate for all ages, and every participant will receive an opioid rescue kit that includes Narcan. Also from the Health Department, we have a youth mental health first aid course on February 11th from 9 to 3 at the Chelmsford Town Hall. Teaches adults how to identify, understand, and respond to signs of mental health and substance use challenges among youth ages 12 to 18. We also have a community CPR class on February 18th from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m., also at the Chelmsford Town Hall in the fire training room. Each participant who completes the 4-hour training will obtain an American Heart Association Heart Saver CPR AED first aid certificate that is valid for 2 years. And they have a note here that there is a $20 fee for the card. And please call the health department to reserve your spot. The health department is also holding an event on healthy relationships on February 11th from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. It is virtual. Understanding abuse, setting boundaries, and identifying warning signs. They also have an announcement regarding Care Solace, which is a mental health referral service that also offers housing and food insecurity support for Chelmsford residents and employees. It is available 24/7 with multilingual support, and they provide care regardless of insurance. We have a depression and anxiety support group being held on February 25th. It's every fourth Tuesday of the month from 6:30 p.m. to 8 p.m. at the Chelmsford Center for the Arts. It's open to adults 18 years and older, and registration is preferred but not required. Also, the health department is holding blood pressure screenings the first Thursday of the month from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. at the health department offices. The first Thursday of the month from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. at the Chelmsford Health Department, and the last Thursday of the month from 8:30 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. at the Chelmsford Senior Center. And no registration is required for that. And some other updates from the Health Department. February is Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. This month is dedicated to raising awareness surrounding the prevalence and impact of dating violence among teens. They would also like everyone to know that it is not too late to get your flu shot, and you can call the health department to schedule yours today. And also, the health department has free COVID tests available in their office, 1 box per family, and you can stop in and grab those. And also, they have an announcement here regarding Empowering Chelmsford youth with I Decide, new facilitators ready to make a difference. The I Decide program, developed by the Center for Addiction Medicine at Mass General Hospital, is a comprehensive drug education curriculum for middle and high school students. It focuses on intervention, diversion, and empowerment to help students make healthy decisions and understand the impact of substance abuse. And the Public Health and Wellness Coordinator, Taryn Angel, and Public Health and Community Social Worker, Marissa Cameron, have completed facilitator training and are eager to bring this valuable service to Chelmsford. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're now at the public input section of this meeting. Is there anybody here that would like to address the board on any topic? Okay, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Brian Latina, Precinct 9, Town Meeting Rep 15, Jesse Road is my address. Last week on the 3rd, Monday, you had what I thought was a public session of the Select Board with no public comment allowed. I felt that this should not be a standard, and I hope we're not approaching that. Town meeting has reduced our time to legislate in so-called debate, as town moderator calls it, discussion, down to 3 minutes. That's not enough time to consider that free speech. This board just told me I can only speak for 3 minutes. I represent 9,000 residents in my precinct, and being able to speak once every 2 weeks for 3 minutes seems a little short. I consider that to be a little bit of blocking my ability to speak freely. I don't care for it. I noticed last week we were talking. The town manager gave quite an extensive discussion about what it's going to cost taxpayers next year and how much he's cut out of the budget. And I was impressed with cutting something out of the budget. First time I've seen that in a long time. We cut out a few people, and I know that's very painful. We're seeing that in the federal government, and nobody likes it, it appears, except taxpayers. I wish we'd consider looking at what we paid in 2019 before COVID. That's now 5 years past, and it's time to go back and look at our budget relative to not having $10 million in the last couple of years that we got to spend on anything we wanted. Senior Center added on Monday night a new program for 45-year-olds. That's not seniors. That should not happen, and I expect all the different topics that they were adding might cost some more money. You should look at that. We talked about cutting out the finance books, I believe, out of our budget, so town meeting members will not get a printed book. They can print it themselves, I heard on Monday night. Don't care for that. We used to get it mailed to our house. People don't look at them as it is. We need to have them earlier and not virtually on my cell phone. I can't read it. Snow removal was excessive on Sunday. I had a truck drive by and back and forth until I stopped them and asked them not to scrape the rest of the pavement off the street. There was no snow left. And he said, I'm only doing what they tell me to do. Don't widen Jesse Road. Drive back and forth 3 times and go away, not 15. And then salt it with a huge truck. Non-Massachusetts plates, still a problem in our so-called project areas, the housing units that we've added. Last time I counted, there were 23 plates, just at the projects over at Turnpike and Warren. That amounts to $20,200 in excess taxes we didn't collect this year, just those plates. And yes, they've been there for 3 or 4 years. Nobody cares.
And that's 3 minutes. That was very good. Excellent timing.
I'm Maria Carries. I live at 10 Parkerville Road in Chelmsford, Mass. And I'm also a co-owner of a business in Chelmsford as well. I wrote a letter, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time having this discussion. You all received my letter. This is in regards to the rezoning of the parcel that is now 24 Maple Road, or Maxwell's, formerly Agway. Thank you to those who did respond. I do appreciate that. I think the warrant article that's being proposed today is jumping the gun. We don't need it. We are reasonable people. I'm here also on behalf of my neighbors who asked that I attend and speak to you. Like I said, we're reasonable people. We can compromise. We are happy for the most part with Lockheed and what they've done. We've already had conversations with them. I think we can continue those conversations and see if we can do something that is in the best interest of both the residents and the business. So I would just ask that we throw away that rezoning altogether and let them do what is best for not just them, but for us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, there's nobody on Zoom, Paul. Okay, we'll move on to committee vacancies.
The following boards and committees have vacancies as of February 10th, 2025. The CCA Town Hall Advisory Committee, the Clean Energy and Sustainability Committee, the Commission on Disabilities, the Council on Aging Board, the Conservation Commission, the Cultural Council, the Historic District Commission, the Holiday Decorating Committee, the Parade Committee, the Public Records Advisory Committee, and the Recycling Committee. If you are interested in serving on a town board or committee, please complete an online application available on the town website, or you can contact the town manager's office for more information at 978-250-5202.
Thank you. Okay, we have one license this evening for St. Vartanant's Church. Is there anybody here?
Yes, he's online. Good evening. Good evening, Bert.
Hello. Hi, my name is Bruce Kajanian. I live in Dracut, and I'm the Parish Council Chairman of St. Vartanant's. And we have a liquor license request for March 1st for our Mardi Gras event.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for the applicant? We know they've done this many times before.
We've done this, every year since I've been here,
Yeah.
at least once.
Okay, so any questions? If not, we'll take a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the one-day all-alcoholic beverages license for St. Vartanant's Armenian Church at 180 Old Westford Road for March 1st, 2025, as presented.
Second?
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Good luck, and maybe...
Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Have a good night.
Hey,
All right, now we have Christopher Hayes from NEMCOG is going to give us a presentation about At Home in Greater Lowell.
Hello. Hi, so this is Chris Hayes, Housing and Economic Development Program Manager at Northern Middlesex Council of Governments, the regional planning agency for Lowell and all of the surrounding communities and as far west as Pepperell. And thank you so much for giving us some time today to talk about At Home in Greater Lowell, which is the regional housing strategy for the Greater Lowell region. And can we go to the next slide? So we want to kind of talk about both what At Home in Greater Lowell is and why we started the planning process that we really see as a plan, not just for our agency, but for all the member communities in NIMCOG. We want to talk about some of the strategies and local actions we're recommending as part of At Home in Greater Lowell. And then finally, we want to talk about what is happening next over the year 2025. Next slide, please. And so just to start off, At Home in Greater Lowell is a housing plan that we started about a year and a half ago. And that was really at the request of all 9 of our member communities, plus the business community. And really looking at some critical issues such as homelessness, such as folks having housing cost burdens, especially renters that pay more than half their income on housing, and staffing shortages, folks both at businesses and in the municipalities having trouble recruiting because of the high cost of housing. And we were asked what a regional approach would look like to tackle those housing challenges. We'll go to the next slide. And, you know, the initial data that we found is that households are increasing and projected to increase, but that's really faster than the population increase. That's because households are getting smaller, folks are aging, there are more seniors living alone, and more young families that don't have as many children. So we are seeing a need for more units and smaller units, different kinds of units, accessible units, etc., to address these housing shortages. Next slide. Because we're increasing the number of households without necessarily increasing the number of housing units, this is kind of region-wide, all of those towns, we're seeing really increased, not increased vacancy rates, decreased vacancy rates. So a healthy apartment rental vacancy rate tends to be around 8%, and sales units tends to be 2%. And about 15 years ago, that's where we were at. But we've been slowly seeing a decrease in vacancy rates. So it wasn't necessarily all happening during COVID, but it's actually been a slow decrease in vacancy rates over the last 10, 15 years. Next slide. And we've really seen that now that has led to an increased housing cost burden. We've seen the housing prices again rise roughly at that same rate as the vacancy rates have shrunk. So we really do see this as a housing supply problem, and one that isn't necessarily caused by recent immigration, but really a kind of a long-standing problem as these households shrink and age, and we need more housing units to serve the same amount of population. And so going over the entire Nimkai region, more than a quarter pay more than 30% of their income on housing, and that includes rental and sales units, so that includes people who own their own home. And that's really concentrated among really the lowest income, so the extremely low income. That's really the sector we see people paying more than half of their income on housing. Okay, the next slide. And then through the conversations and interviews we've had during this planning process, we've seen that this is really impacting us in a number of ways. In the short time, we see seniors struggling to stay in their communities. We see those labor shortages that we were talking about, and we see those difficulties recruiting that we talked about. But we also see that less money is being spent at local businesses as more is being spent on housing. We do see homelessness as something that is very directly correlated to the housing shortage. Yes, mental health and substance abuse is major factors in that, but we're seeing an increase in homelessness even among other types of folks, just as the housing shortage increases. And then more in the longer term, we're concerned about the young adults leaving for less expensive areas. That includes New Hampshire, but that also includes the region entirely to the south. And that businesses are reconsidering their location in our region due to the shortage of working age people in the region and the decrease in the labor force. And of course, that would ultimately lead to increasing pressure on municipality budgets, as there are fewer working age folks to pay taxes, fewer businesses to pay taxes. That's more looking into the future, but it's something that we see as a problem that is on the horizon. So for this housing plan, we have worked together for the past year. A few folks around the table, we've really appreciated your contributions at our planning processes. We can go to the next slide. And really, the strategies that we've come up with have been developed over the course of talking to more than 100 people, whether that be through surveys, through 3 summits that we've had over the course of the year, or through other one-on-one interviews that we've had over the course of the year. Next slide. And so really we've kind of developed this plan that includes 3 parts. The first part is something that we are looking to finalize in the next couple of months, and that's what we want to talk about today. And we want to get that right because the next 2 parts we're going to be working on in 2025, which is a storytelling program, so basically a public education program that highlights stories of folks looking for housing, folks who have found housing, folks who provide housing, to better kind of understand how the policy decisions we make play out in real time. And a municipal toolkit, which includes potentially education material and step-by-step guides and other elements for planning boards and municipal staff to be able to work on local strategies to tackle some of these housing challenges. And this is why we really want to get these strategies right, because we want to make sure that all 9 of the communities basically buy in and agree broadly on the strategies, even though they're going to be looking very different in each community, because Chelmsford is different than Lowell and Chelmsford is different than Dunstable. But we want to make sure that broadly we get buy-in so that we know which strategies we need to be making those toolkits for, and et cetera. So we're really asking today whether you'd support advancing local actions of the strategies we were talking about, what you would need to advance those strategies from NIMCOG or from other regional partners, and if we need to adjust any of those strategies to make it make more sense for both Chelmsford and the region at large. So I'm going to talk about just 2 of the strategies. You've got a handout that has all, I think it's 17 strategies right now, organized under 6 goals. We're going to highlight a couple of them that have the onus on kind of, it's going to be more about how municipalities implement them at the local level than at the regional level. One of them is what we call missing middle zoning. That's basically looking to allow smaller multifamily units, whether that be townhouses or duplexes or triplexes. What we tend to see is that there are a lot of single-family homes on really large lots, or there's really big garden apartments with like 100 units in one building or one complex. And there's really not that much zoning that allows for these kind of smaller types of units where somebody could buy a duplex and rent out the second one, or 2 people can buy as condos. And again, those are some of the small units that people seem to be demanding more and more, whether they be small families or seniors that are looking to downsize. And local actions could include looking to adopt zoning that is cottage style, so basically allowing very small lots, but small homes on those small lots, or potentially the missing middle, which could be townhomes, duplexes, et cetera. And we can go to the next slide. Those are just some examples of the types of housing units we're talking about when we're talking about missing middle zoning, which could include a variety of different housing types that are kind of traditional to New England, but we don't see being built very much anymore. Slide. And then the other one, that strategy we wanted to highlight, is inclusionary zoning. That is, I actually don't remember if Chelmsford has inclusionary zoning. Yes. 25%. Okay. So what we are recommending is that municipalities, both if they don't have the zoning, which, again, for people in the audience who might not know what inclusionary zoning is, basically it says that if you're above a certain threshold, if you build more than 7 units at once, that you have, or however many units at once, you have to provide a certain number that are income restricted, subsidized housing. And that's a really great way to provide affordable housing. And what we're recommending is that all municipalities, those who don't have that type of zoning, take a look and see if they could adopt it. But those that do a market study and see if they need to tweak that zoning in any way. In some cases, it kind of backfires, and the market can't support the affordable units, and therefore no affordable units get built, no units get built at all. And in other cases, the market's so hot that actually you could increase the amount of affordable units and get more affordable units per market rate unit, which we really see a need for, especially at the lower incomes. So with that in mind, we're recommending market studies to really see what the market could bear and make sure to tweak it to make sure that the the inclusionary zoning is meeting each municipality's housing goal. Okay, next slide. So, like I said, those were just 2 strategies. We've got a lot of strategies that we're happy to talk about, Kelly and I. And I never introduced Kelly. I just keep saying Kelly and I. Okay. I'm joined here by Kelly Leinema, who is Deputy Director for NIMCOG and kind of my partner in crime in terms of working on this at-home in Greater Lowell plan. And what we are committed to do over the next year is, well, first of all, to finalize these strategies and share that to you when it is ready and what we're calling part one, the data and strategies. So that includes a lot more data than I shared tonight, along with the list of strategies and more detailed discussion on what those strategies really mean. And then in phase two, we want to continue to regularly communicate as we develop that toolkit and implementation guide and storytelling program. And then finally, at the end, we'll return to share that part two as well, to make sure that we are keeping the municipalities, the select boards, and the planning boards and all the other committees that are involved in that housing discussion up to date, so we can really work together to tackle some of the housing challenges. And I believe with that, yeah, we are happy to take any questions or even just feedback. We're really recording all of this so we can adjust those strategies and bring it back to you.
Okay, any questions for Chris?
I have a question.
Go right ahead.
So if some of the housing shortage is driven by the fact that we have so many seniors staying in place or aging in place, and yet the size of family households is decreasing, what happens if we start implementing these strategies? What happens as the senior mortality rate increases? Then do we have a big surplus?
So at least with the housing projections that the state has created, and I would say they're pretty conservative housing projections, at least until 2040, the number of households is projected to continue to increase due to just mainly natural birth rates and immigration from within the United States, from other states.
And so
It's hard to
what's the
see-
senior mortality rate over the next 15 years?
So
Because that's a generational thing right now where we have a higher senior population than in decades past, right?
It's hard to say. In 2050, that's when we see that impact beginning to happen, the senior mortality rate, because
20
this
when?
2050,
That far out?
that's when the projections are, yes.
How old are the boomers now?
I can definitely get back to you in terms of the specifics of how that modeling was created.
Just curious.
There is honestly a really large group that are millennials that are living in the boomers' homes right now that we're seeing. So basically, a large group of 20 to 35-year-olds that are, and this is in most of the communities except for Lowell, 25 to 30-year-olds that are showing up in the population data, but not showing up as heads of households, meaning that they are still living with parents, most likely, unless they're big
I get
roommate
that, but
situations.
my
And
question
so-
was more around, do you wind up with a gross imbalance as the senior mortality rate increases because we have more seniors today than we typically do?
It's hard to project in 2050. A lot of things can happen and change. But yeah, we can definitely get details on that. And Kelly, if you have anything additional.
Sure. I mean, I think it's sort of like the senior mortality rate is also offset by the household formation of this younger group that's unable to find housing right now. The other thing that we do know from the data is that households are smaller. So people are having fewer children, so the need for those smaller units is going to remain the same, just because we're not seeing the same size of households, and that is just a general trend all across the United States, and that's been trending down over the past few decades. So it's sort of like some of these things offset or compensate for each other. So we're not anticipating that there's going to be a sudden excess of housing. What we also know is that we are actually losing a lot of population as a state, especially in that 20 to 40-year-old age group, because they're unable to find housing right now. So part of the goal is to also retain some of the younger population as they're leaving the universities or as they're graduating from high school, to retain them in our region, because we don't necessarily want to lose that economic development opportunity. And we don't necessarily want to see families lose their adult children to move to a whole other state, which is what's happening now. So.
Can I ask a question?
Are you done with your questions, Virginia?
I just have comments left, so go ahead with questions.
Okay, go ahead.
George has a question.
Excuse me. How much zoning changes are we going to have to be made? You're going to have
lot of zoning changes because of the size and trying to get more units on, so that you'll have to change some of the zoning for.
So what really phase 2 is about is exploring that. So right now, we know that some zoning changes are necessary because really those kind of middle-sized units just aren't allowed. But we haven't really gone into that it needs to be a big change or a little change, because what we want to do over the next phase is do some scenario development and see how those households, as again, younger households that might want to be established, et cetera, where they might be in the region. So some of those might be in Lowell or in Chelmsford. You might want to look at really densely around like Vinyl Square and Chelmsford Center, as opposed to spreading it out. Or maybe you do want to spread it out, or maybe you want to put it more toward highway on-ramps and that type of thing. So we want to do that kind of scenario development with the municipalities, hand in hand with the municipalities, to help decide how much that would be and really what would serve each municipality, because the answer is going to be different for each one.
And one of the goals of this plan has really been to try to right-size the recommendations for each community. Like Chris said at the beginning, we know that Chelmsford is different than Dunstable, is different than Lowell. And so that is part of phase 2. It also is tying in with the state's housing production plan, which was just released. And so there basically are sort of projections for each region. Part of our job is to take those projections and work with our communities to understand what that looks like in every community. We're not generally recommending wholesale zoning of every parcel in every community.
Right.
It's trying to work with communities to understand where are places that you want to grow and where are places that you want to preserve, because those two things really strike a balance.
I think you had a great idea, what you just mentioned. I think we brought it up at the Housing Advisory Board about like around Vinyl Square, which has got, a lot of older unused property or underdeveloped, underused property. It could be converted into senior housing, which also has a lot of the amenities, which would be a lot nicer for the elderly people, where they could walk to the bank, they could walk to the coffee shop, whatever in the area, and then maybe develop some kind of, like a bus to the senior center or something a couple times a day to pick up and drop off and stuff like that. I think, I think that's where I would think it would be great to start with. I mean, people, and they would be it wouldn't be like being alone. I mean, a lot of the people today, I know I live alone now. I'm an old man now, but it's, I can understand, when the weather's bad and it's cold and it gets dark very quick and you have nobody to talk to and people don't have relatives around or whatever. So it'd be nice to have it in a community where, there's people around and, there's always some activity that they could get involved in, visit. So I do believe around the areas that are there now, if we could just expand them, like I said, Vinyl Square would be perfect for it, because obviously I grew up in North Chelmsford, so I mean the center is a little bit different because it's a little bit more developed and what have you. But I think we talked about it. I think it'd be a great idea. But I think smaller housing in other areas. I don't know if they'd be like a 40B project or just spot zoning or whatever. But I mean, if it made sense. And again, you have your, infrastructure problems too. So, but I think you do a great job. I've attended a few of your, your sessions, and they've been very informative. So, thank you.
Thank you. I've taken notes.
Okay.
Okay, now.
Aaron?
Yeah, I have a question actually. I'm just curious if there's any conversation going on about with the increase in the number of units, if there's conversation about the number of rental units versus wholly owned, and if there's any conversation going on anywhere about promoting ownership as opposed to rental. This is kind of a problem that I have a lot, where you see, 400 apartment complexes going up, and I understand that increases the housing bucket by 400, but it's all rental. And for, young people and young families, I think renting has a place, but I do think ownership is also better for people in the long run. But I don't see a lot of conversation about that. So I don't know what's going on out there.
Yeah, just directly on Home and Greater Lowell, one way that we do address that is a strategy to work with state and federal partners. And I know in Lowell, they're looking to expand the One Mortgage program, which provides low interest, actually the down payment assistance for first-time home buyers. And what we're looking at is trying to work as a region to expand that program to include either low or no interest mortgages, depending on the income of the population, along with rent-to-own programs or other first-time home buying programs to be able to provide stair steps for rental into ownership, because we're seeing this kind of gap of the rental units being so expensive that people can't put aside the money for the down payment to get into the housing units. We're also seeing a gap where the sales units are just so expensive at this point. And we do know that national interest rates do play into this, but putting that aside for now, even outside of those, the gap between the expense of buying a house and renting a house is just so large that we're seeing fewer people be able to make that leap. So that's one way that we're looking into supporting that, along with, again, trying to get those vacancy rates back to a healthy level so that just the cost of buying a home would hopefully be less over time.
And I think one other aspect to that is looking at different types of housing. So, I know for me personally, a starter home was a second floor unit in a two-family.
Yep.
And so that was, for us, what we could afford. There's no way we could afford a single-family home.
I grew up in a three-decker.
Yeah,
My
exactly.
parents bought the
And
three-decker.
so
We
it's-
lived in one apartment. They rented the other two, and then
Yep. And so it's trying to think, are we providing different types of starter homes for different types of families? So, sometimes that third story in a triple decker is the starter home for somebody to move from an apartment, and then they build equity in that. Because I think what everybody knows is that housing is one of the greatest ways to gain wealth in this country. And so trying to encourage people on that ladder of home ownership is really important, both for people who are making average income and also people who are making lower incomes.
Yeah. Is there any movement as far as, because I know a lot of the two families or the multifamilies that are built, they're then put into condo, they're sold as condo units. Is there any conversation? And again, you're going to understand what I'm saying, right? Because you grew up you did the same thing, right? So is there any conversation about keeping them in that kind of realm where somebody can buy the whole building and essentially rent the other side out? Or I just feel like everything ends up being condoed now and sold off separately, so there really isn't that opportunity as much anymore as there used to be.
I think that's definitely something we can consider. One of the things that we're looking at in phase 2 is looking at sort of not just how many units per community, like a range of units per community, but also like what percentage of those units are affordable, what percentage of them are rental versus homeownership and in different types of housing. So we can start to get a little bit more nuanced in the recommendations, which might include some pathways to building a two-family home so that you can rent it out, or so that you can have your parents stay in the ground floor or something like that. So I think those are questions we don't have the answers to yet, but it's something we're looking at as far as phase 2 is concerned.
Okay, good. Thank you.
So I'll just make a few comments. I'm very pleased with the strategies that you're suggesting on two levels. One being, it's not a one-size-fits-all. You've made that very clear, that the different communities are going to have different strategies and how they're implemented. And the other one being the kind of the goal of, incremental changes to zoning, which I think is so critical. The past, 18 months or so, we've had these mandates from the state, and I think that has caused more angst than anything that we've seen recently. And I think because it is kind of, proposed as a one-size-fits-all. Every community has to do so much for MBTA zoning. Every community has to allow ADUs under these criteria. So I think it's absolutely the way to get buy-in from the communities. So I applaud you for that. And Virginia, you had some comments?
I do. So you said that you were asking us to adopt these strategies, and respectfully, I don't feel comfortable sitting here as a select board member saying, yes, I endorse adopting these on behalf of the town, because there's a lot more experts, people who are far more informed about zoning and things than I am, and I think there's a lot more people that need to weigh into whether and to what extent these things are right for Chelmsford, including the planning board and the housing authority. And I know it's more work on your part, but I kind of feel like it's incumbent upon you to get the feedback from them as well. I would support this as considerations going into ongoing processes and ongoing trade spaces. And, you know, we've been having other conversations in town about what is our strategy for housing and commercial growth. And I would definitely support this as something that feeds into that conversation. I don't feel that I can sit here and say, I want to adopt this on behalf of the town tonight. And I appreciate the amount of work that's gone into this, and I went to some of the sessions, and I know how hard it is to come up with a cogent strategy with the specifics, so thank you for that. I want to touch on something Pat referenced, which was these top-down mandates that we've been getting, the MBTA, the ADUs, and I do think there's a cultural sting still from that. I also wonder if it would be prudent to, especially with the ADUs, to see how that plays out a little bit before we start like physically introducing some of these other zoning changes. And I think that changes like this, I appreciate that you're going to help support figuring out where the right pieces are or if towns want to adopt these things. I don't think that can come without some support for looking at infrastructure. Okay, it affects utilities, sewer, water, schools, public safety. And in our passion to solve the housing crisis, sometimes I think the pragmatics of what goes behind that are forgotten, and then those become a crisis. So I know you're like a small staff and there's but somewhere we gotta figure out how do you provide a balanced view and how do you address all the things that come with increased housing density, which is really what you're talking about. And then, like I said, it's just, I think this is bigger than the select board to say we adopt. And I would support saying we should leverage the work you've done and consider it in some of these ongoing strategic discussions and have you support that. And that's my thought. And I would also, Pat, when you're done with the board, I'd be interested to hear what the town manager thoughts
Right, and I just have a question now. Was the expectation that you expected us to endorse it, formally endorse it this evening?
Well, that's what the chart said. That's why I was.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I would say more accurately, we wanted to learn what aspects you'd like us to see work on and what questions answered moving toward that kind of endorsement rather than an actual like vote tonight or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, so I would like to see this kind of in a roll up your sleeves fashion be integrated into some of the other ongoing discussions with the experts in town.
I think that's really good feedback. Thank you. And I just want to point out one thing is that this, and it's kind of hidden in here, but we do recognize, and one of the things we have heard over and over again is the need for infrastructure studies. And this goes from everything from energy to transportation to sewer to stormwater. And so that is a recommendation under Goal 6, and that's something that we really want to, that requires multi-community collaboration, and I think that's really one of the things why it's so important to do a regional housing plan. I know that other regional planning agencies and metropolitan planning organizations across the U.S., they do these kind of studies on a regular basis because it's really important for them to understand do the zoning changes that we're recommending or endorsing, are those things aligned with the infrastructure that we have, and making sure that everything is right-sized, I think is very
Kelly,
important.
could you clarify what you mean when you say a regional housing production plan? Because that makes me cringe, because it feels like it's another top-down regional thing that we're going to do, so.
Sorry, did I say production?
I don't know what you said, a regional housing plan or whatever, but what is
Yeah.
a regional, what does that mean?
So this is at home in Greater Lowell. It's a regional housing strategy, I said
Right,
plan.
okay.
But it's really identifying strategies that apply across our region that can be fine-tuned and tailored.
Adopted individually and
Yes.
tailored individually?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. It's not a mandate,
thank you.
yeah, just to be clear. Yeah.
And I would like to definitely also reiterate that we're really hoping, and this is why we're having these conversations, that this isn't NIMCOG's plan that we're taking to you, but rather this is your plan that we're helping facilitate. And by your, I mean the town of Chelmsford, but the other communities that surround the city of Lowell.
And are you planning to go to things like the planning boards and the housing boards, or with this same presentation?
Anybody that will have us, we will gladly come. I will say that we have talked to Chelmsford Housing Authority staff quite a bit, but happy to go to planning boards or anybody anywhere else.
Okay, Paul, do you have any input, or?
Yeah, a couple thoughts. And I think it's a concern. And I'll sort of go on the lighter side. You remember the movie The Sandlot, where everyone in the neighborhood played ball in the lot? And why I mention that is what you're talking is basically infill. I mean, Chelmsford's developed. And I think the concern is there's this, we get from the administration and why you're here tonight is housing. But sometimes I think and this is I think some of the comments you're hearing earlier about infrastructure and so forth, or bigger picture things, is there's also the value of open space. And that's why I mentioned the word sandlot is, if the goal is to fill in housing, it's sort of contrary to like I said, the previous generation's view of, well, you wanted a house in the suburbs that had a yard and that you had a park and the kids could play, and that's why the idea of the sandlot and so forth. And now it seems to be infill. And so then the question becomes, well, then where are the socialization and interaction situations, opportunities that are generic that can spring? And I think that's a concern I could see going forward is if you have infill and you have the density, and then you have everybody on this, then where is the societal and the communications and the networks? The other end of the spectrum would be the economic development piece. And you're a regional planning agency and there's the regional effort, but we're not, I think the concern that some of us have, and we've seen this in Chelmsford, is we're tending to be more growing in value in terms of our commercial value is diminishing, the value residential is growing, and then where's the job creation, where's the economic development that sort of accompanies that housing development? Because we're not always going to be in a situation that we've been in the more recent times where it's a labor shortage, and then where's the economic engine, and then where's the opportunities? Because then that creates the issue of all the environmental things that you're trying to avoid, which is use of automobiles for travel, the greenhouse effects because you've got congestion on roadways and everything because you're traveling, to employment locations because they're no longer part of the inner core, which is what the commuter rail system is geared towards, this hub and spoke situation. And so I think why it's hard in Chelmsford is Chelmsford has many people, including some in this room, who were alive when Chelmsford's population tripled, but yet it feels like a never-ending treadmill. Build more housing, more population, which then means you just don't have enough housing, you need more and then, so now the town triples in population, is built out, and yet the problem exists of, well, we need more housing, we need more population. And I think that's sort of why the mindset tends to be, we've the town kind of experienced that, but look where we are today. We're 3 times the size as we were, in the youth of the generation that's now, in the latter part of our community, and I think that's what makes it a hard sell. It's like, and the fact that housing is a fluid commodity. In other words, if we adopt this strategy and people are mobile, it's not going to lower the housing cost. You're going to bring in more people by the attractiveness of the opportunity to live here. Because the housing shortage isn't just limited to Chelmsford or Massachusetts. It's a national, in fact, even goes into Canada and other parts. And I think that's what's making this so difficult. I know the answer isn't just throw up your hands and walk away from it, because you're right, the demographics are different. There is a need for a smaller housing size. But I think people are trying to figure out what is it that they want. What is the North Star? What is the desired state? And I think that's what's missing from the whole discussion. Housing is a vehicle to what end? And I think if less people see what that desired end is, that's what makes it so hesitant to get people engaged. What is the desired state? Because housing isn't the North Star. It's a component of a strategy to get to that North Star, and I think that's what's missing from the broader discussion. And so I applaud you for what you're doing. You're doing the perfect thing as the housing advocates, and this quest on housing, and we know it's the administration's focus, we know but I think the question is people need to adopt that, but they need to see it as part of a greater strategy. And I guess that's what my comments are about in terms of how does it fit with the environmental strategy, the open space strategy, the economic development strategy, and therefore, what is the vision that we're trying to get people to be? Because if the message is just housing density, that's not going to engage the populace to say, yeah, we need to go there. And so, thank you for listening to me, but I think that's my perspective and what I've been seeing for some time.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So these are very good points. Thank you. And I think it really resonates to say, what is the vision? Like, what is the end game? Why are we doing this? And so I have a few quick answers. I'm sure Kelly has a few ideas too, but it's an ongoing conversation. So one thing I want to mention is we definitely, we did not start this planning process because of the administration. We started it really at the request of the towns and the local businesses, the local business community, I should say. Since we first applied for our very first grant for this planning process, MBTA communities came into effect. The Housing Choice Act has been passed, including the ADU law, and so a lot of things have changed as we've been doing this. So we do, though, want to keep in mind why we were asked this, which was really about local challenges and in the business community, and local challenges in terms of renters feeling like they were paying too much in rent and not being able to buy homes in the region. So we really want to continue to think about that as a North Star rather than Massachusetts' big problem. Second, we are doing a comprehensive economic development strategy, which is a 5-year plan. We're calling it Greater Lowell Stronger Together. And housing is an important piece of that, but it is only one piece. And we are very aware of the balance between housing and making sure that we still have businesses in the communities, in all the communities. That includes lifestyle, important Main Street restaurant and retail. That includes occupants of large business parks where people are going to be employed. That's part of why we want to address housing, is so that those employers don't leave for the South where it's cheaper, but also knowing that that is a balance, and that if there's no room for businesses, we couldn't have businesses in our communities. So that's certainly something that is being talked about. And that question of where do we want to preserve, where do we want to grow, where do we want to have more walkable area or convert some formerly commercial areas into housing versus what do we want to preserve for commercial, that's kind of the journey we want to take in the next year, certainly. And I think those are really critical questions to answer. And finally, well, I know for some communities, preserving open space is about thinking about smaller lots so they can preserve their farms, preserve their woodlands, and look at maybe growing more densely in the town center. I know Chelmsford is a different story because you are very, you don't have huge tracts of farmland. There are still some remaining farms we know, and I imagine you'd like to preserve those. And how can we work with preserving those along with allowing for some of those diverse units, because we are talking about population increase, but it's very modest. It's more about, like we said, the household increase, where more variety of different types of units rather than allowing for another tripling of population or anything like that. And that's, again, talking region-wide, because we haven't really dug into individual communities. We're really just right now talking about a region, and we'll go into those communities hopefully in the next year. I don't know if I'm missing anything.
No, I think you got it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much for coming.
Appreciate all your work.
Thank you.
Okay, next on our agenda is potential endorsement of the Municipal Empowerment Act. We talked about this actually beginning of January when we were looking at the resolutions that the Mass Municipal Association discussed during their conference last month. And one of the items was pretty much the Municipal Empowerment Act, which we had voted then to support. The governor has refiled the Municipal Empowerment Act, and the MMA is asking us to use our voices to move it forward if we can. So I just wanted to put this on the agenda to see if the board would be okay to send a letter to our legislative delegation in support of the Municipal Empowerment Act. And I was thinking that we could maybe highlight 4 or 5 of the different parts of it that are especially critical or could be critical to us. So don't know if anybody has any thoughts on it.
Did they give you any ideas of what they were looking for?
Well, they just, they just want us to reach out to the legislature as, as massively, I guess you could say, as possible, to try to get, have more success this time around to get it passed versus the last time when it ended up not going anywhere in the legislature. There are some things that I think would be critical to us, or things that would be important to us. On page 1 of the second document here, that lists it section by section summary, I had noted a couple that I thought would be important, like to make permanent the COVID-era flexibilities for public meetings. They keep extending that about a year at a time, but to make it permanent, I don't see any downside really to making it permanent, even if they wanted to put a few restrictions on it, but just to have it available, I think would be critical. So that was one.
May I ask
Sure.
I have just a clarification question on some of these pages as you go through them, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
So on page 1, Paul, under municipal procurement, the last bullet says eliminates the requirement to publish notices for competitive bids on combis. Why are they doing that?
Because they already make you, let me explain what combis is so that people watching, I know the board may be aware. Combis is the state's procurement newsletter, combis, that obviously the nice acronym. But the state also makes cities and towns publish it in the central register and goods and services. And that's really where the vendors and the bidders look to. And so basically it seemed to be repetitive and redundant, and again, another task for cities and towns to then put it onto the combi system.
So would combis eventually maybe go away?
Well, it just wouldn't be another, again, mandate that you have to then take the form and effort to go through the combines. It's not a major reform effort, but that's what happens is, and because for years, and again, it probably is a generational thing, for like decades, you had to advertise in the Secretary of State's Goods and Services Bulletin and Central Register, depending upon what type of service or if you're doing design of services and so forth, selection. Combines is the more recent phenomenon of the state in terms of an online system, and I just think cities and towns are just sort of saying, again, you're making more work for us. So again, it's not a question they don't want to publish it or make people, bidders know about it. It's just, why are we having to do duplicate state publications?
I feel like combis is what everybody is actually
That's
kind
what
of
I'm
actively
familiar with.
using, right?
Right.
Like the town,
Right,
posting
but-
on the town.
Right, but traditional means, and again, maybe it's the old school guard of the MMA and some of the longer-term municipal government peoples, central register that's where you put all your designer selection, you're looking for an OPM and so forth, those type of things. And then goods and services, as the name suggested, was where you then advertise for if you were out buying, materials and products and consultants and so forth. And so perhaps it should have been, again, I didn't do the list, but it ought to almost be like one or the other. Why do we have multiple state publications for procurement? So again, I think that's probably why it's the bottom bullet is.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't fall on my sword
Exactly.
over it, but I just didn't understand it. And Pat, I'm sorry, I agree with your highlighting the hybrid meetings as one that's important on that first page.
I mean, and there may be some that we want to indicate that we would like to see not go forward, and that might be one. The one you just mentioned. Or not.
Like I said, I wouldn't fall on my sword over it. I just didn't understand it because I thought combis was where everybody went.
Yeah.
They go out and they do training on combis
Mhm.
for small businesses,
Yeah.
and it's very prevalent, so I
It's-
didn't know
it's
why
a-
the
it's a
MMA
s-
picked that.
Because it's seen in the local level at the state bid list, and what they're making it is they're making it a municipal, in other words, you have to publish your invitations on the state's bid list. And that's why it's just foreign to municipal governments, because they use combis as where we go. In other words, if we wanted to go out and buy, road de-icing, we'd go to combis because that's the state contract. Whereas goods and services is more of a procurement notice, and that's what central register is as well. So the feeling is you're just making combis kind of a universal hub, but it's
Optional.
optional, I think is how they would look
Does
at it.
that
But
decrease our visibility as a municipality?
no,
for,
because
like,
again,
what's
we
out
see it
there?
as
I mean,
professionals that we have to go through. The one that is interesting.
We'll just fall back into
Yeah, you just
the
fall
other.
back on it, but again, it's not a major item.
So even if that were to pass, it probably wouldn't change the
It's not
practices
going
that
to
we
change,
follow.
no.
Okay.
So,
I mean, in 10 years, I've never seen the state come around and say, come get trained on the center register of goods and
Right.
services. It's all combis.
because that's done through the procurement process. In other words,
I
when
see.
you become a municipal procurement officer
Then
or
you
become
know.
a procurement associate, those are the programs that they put out through that program.
Yeah.
Whereas the combis it's more broad. Anyway, it's just a
I
different
won't
vehicle.
belabor it, I just-
Okay, it's just a different vehicle.
Okay, was there anything else on the ones on page one that you had anybody had any comments on?
No.
What's the post-retirement? Oh, just so you can keep people,
Yeah, that's really big by retirees and those new soon-to-be retirees. It provides you with the extra flexibility to keep people on for more hours after they're formally retired because of the
Critical
quote-unquote critical shortage of positions.
So looking at page two, I mean, that new local option tax on vehicle, motor vehicle excise, I would not be in favor of that. It's further on, it talks about the.
Is that 5% to everybody?
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
which would impact, almost everybody in town.
Right. As opposed to a choice to stay in a hotel or go out to eat?
Exactly, yeah.
My
But
big,
again, it's local option, so.
Right.
If it's, I have no issue if they
you
pass
know,
it.
they never explained why it was 5% and where
Yeah.
it came from. My big beef over the years is the motor vehicle excise schedule, depreciation schedule is so
Mine too,
outdated.
yes.
But nobody wants to touch that because it's a 5-year schedule.
so this
And
is
it doesn't match, there's no way near the value of your vehicle
Right, yeah.
that you pay the tax on. But that
So
was,
this is
Or
their
they should
solution
say
to
a
not touch
surcharge
that.
of
well, this is easier because
Yeah.
they'll get grief if they change the motor vehicle excise depreciation schedule. That was probably the same schedule 50 years ago as it is today, when, when vehicles weren't constructed or have the life that people have today on a vehicle. That's what's wrong with the motor vehicle schedule.
I mean, another way they could handle it, Paul, is to make it a threshold so it's of up to 5%.
Right, yeah, and make it a local option, right?
Well, it is a local option, yeah.
Right, but
But
it's
it's a five-
it's
it's a
a
flat
flat-out
5%.
5%.
Correct, yeah, right.
There's no choice.
There's one towards the middle of that page, appointed and combined treasurer collector. Don't we have that Isn't that what this gentleman sitting out in the audience
Well, that's by
is?
charter. See, this would be by
Oh.
statute.
Oh, okay.
So for many communities don't have home rule charters.
Okay.
That's why.
All right.
Yeah.
And this would enable them to, it wouldn't,
Right,
it
yeah.
wouldn't
Right.
force them to. It
Yeah.
just,
So anybody else have anything?
Is there anything on this page that particularly you feel passionate about?
No,
Paul?
no.
All right, how about page 3?
I don't understand the third one, the amortization. What is that?
Oh, basically, if you have to go into deficit for an emergency, let's say you,
Extraordinary snow removal or a
yeah, or the,
hurricane comes through?
or the
or-
floods that hit in Western Mass and so forth, or in Leominster, if you may recall, they had a bad situation. You had to pay that off in 1 year. What they're
I
trying to do
see.
is, well, why can't we spread that cost out over a multi-year period? Big- yeah,
Is
the
there
big- yeah.
anything
No,
big
the
on
big
that
one this year
page?
was whether you wanted to borrow for a school project from 30 to 40 years, but it's like taking a home mortgage and borrowing it for 40 years. It's gonna cost you a whole
Yeah,
lot more in interest
right.
over 40 years than do 30. And the problem is you then have overlapping interest to projects, because if you have multiple schools, you're not gonna be paying one off before you pay down another appreciably.
All right, anything on page 4? Anybody has anything?
what about the Chapter 90 expenditures? Chapter 90
Is that on page
apportionments
4?
are spent without appropriation?
Yeah, if you don't have it in your charter, then you basically, it's seen as a grant, and then you have to vote it at town meeting, and it's one of those, it'd be what you would see on a
But we
consent
have-
agenda on communities that don't have a charter. They're basically just like, you
So
know,
that doesn't apply to us
Doesn't apply
because we
to
have a
us, no.
charter, but other,
right.
oh, well, that's,
Yeah. I think the big one on page 4, a nice one, would be the elderly exemptions,
Yeah. I've
number
noticed that.
49, the one that's like 2/3 of the way down.
Okay.
It's limited to $500. And this is one of the things you'll see in our agenda tonight. It's been $500 since, Nixon was in the White House. And that's the problem, is the $500 just isn't worth anything when your tax bills now are so many multiples of $500.
Yeah, that's minimum.
How does the state define the age of a senior?
By statute, it's generally 65. Yeah.
What's the COLA for property tax exemptions clause mean, Paul? At the bottom of page 4.
Oh, it's actually, we're bringing some of those statutes to town meeting this spring that allows you to increase the veterans and the senior citizens by the COLA.
Right.
Those are, I don't want to get technical, but there are other exemptions that the COLA isn't allowed for. So some senior exemptions isn't, it doesn't allow the COLA adjustment. It's the 43.
The ones that you're bringing to town meeting are
Are
already
allowed by statute, yeah, the 17s and the 22s, it's the 43s, is that what it is, John? 41s, there's no COLA allowed, so that's what that is, it's to allow the municipalities, again,
Who's in the 41s?
41s are seniors as well, there's 2 different grades of seniors and surviving spouse, and so. So again, I think anything that allows for elderly exemptions and COLAs are only a good thing, because
Okay.
the,
So you would highlight both of those
Yeah.
on that page?
yeah.
And then there's another one at the top of the
Yeah,
next
means
page.
tested, yeah.
Is that another one you
That's
would lump
another
in the
one.
same category?
Yeah, because what's happening is you're seeing a whole bunch of communities, in Westford being a more recent one, that are doing these home rule petitions for senior means tested exemptions. My community did it, but generally it only tends to be about a handful that qualify, but for those people, it's basically allowing people to be able to afford to live in the community if they're if they've been there a long time and don't have assets other than really their dwelling. That's why you see having durational residency and basing on certain other income and asset levels. So again, it's allowing those basically not to be priced out of their community.
Erin, you had a question?
What about the collection of motor vehicle excise? What is the intent to mark their license or registration for non-payment?
Want to explain how that works, Sean?
What is
John-
that?
That's
Yeah.
John's one about doing it directly.
What does that mean? They're going to mark your license?
That's
I don't-
currently, that's been a long-standing
Not that I
program.
plan on not paying
No,
my
no.
excise
so-
taxes, but
So
I
just to explain for everybody, what happens is, with motor vehicle bills, there's a whole series of steps we have to go through to collect them. So the first thing, the initial bill is sent. And then if the initial bill's not paid, we send what's called a demand bill. And then if the demand bill's not paid, there are 2 warrants that are sent out. One's like mailed, one's delivered to where the person lives by a company that works for us called a deputy collector, works for a number of municipalities. If all those steps are exhausted, the deputy collector then notifies the registry of motor vehicles, and so your license or plate is marked for non-renewable. But that's been a long-standing law that we follow that. And then what happens is when the person goes to the registry to renew their license or plate, they're told, the customer service person will give them a printout and tell them they need to talk with their tax collector because there's outstanding bills that have to be paid. So it's kind of a collection tool because,
So right now, the DMV step is not being taken, but this would allow that?
It's almost bypassing. It's allowing the
Yeah.
collector to directly notify the registry if you get a delinquency,
Oh.
as opposed to going through the cumbersome process.
John, while you're there,
Let's see.
Well, before we go on to another one, would you support this?
I would support giving us the flexibility to do it now because otherwise you'd have to have town staff notifying the registry. So the way it works now is there are, the deputy collector works hard to collect all these fees. The town gets its share. They get to keep a few fees, but they're doing the work of notifying the registry, and then they notify the registry as soon as the taxpayer that's seriously delinquent pays. They then notify the registry and they unmark their.
And it only
license.
comes up when the person goes to renew their license?
Yes, exactly.
It's not like a violation or something in their record, right?
Right. I don't believe it's not. To the best of my knowledge, there's nothing
The
criminal about it.
DMV
It's
just says, oh,
because
by the way, there's a
Right.
mark on your license, you have to,
right. It's basically a way because some people.
does
some
it block
people
them from
just-
renewing their license?
Until it's
Right.
cleared, yeah.
Yep, they will not be able to renew it because there's a small percentage of people that no matter how many notices you send them, they will not respond. So this is a collection tool that's been in effect for many, many years. So otherwise,
But you just can't
if I
do
can
it
keep
yourself.
renewing my plate and I'm not paying, I'm not going to pay any attention
Yeah.
to the bills so.
while you're there, the one above it, equalizing property tax appeals.
Let's see, I don't,
So this is, it says currently personal property taxpayers only need to pay half of the tax bill to preserve their right to appeal, while other property taxpayers have to pay in full. Do we have that issue here?
I think it's just utilities who have, that's all I've ever heard of is, but you
Just as
can't
such
file
as
for, you can't
utilities.
file for an abatement until you've paid
Right,
your
if-
full tax.
right, with interest, like with real estate taxes, if you pay any interest, so if your bill is late and you pay any interest to a town, it negates your right to go to the appellate tax board and file an appeal. So you'll often see property owners, the rule is generally pay first, and then if you want to dispute your bill, you can. But if you're late paying, it takes away.
All I'm asking is this an issue that we have that you would want us to
I don't
highlight?
see that
or
as
it
an issue for the
doesn't?
town.
Okay.
We
Okay.
have a small amount, or I can get you percentages of personal property taxes that are uncollectible. The issue we have there is they can't, unlike real estate, they cannot be liened to a specific property. So if a company goes out of business and they have no assets, it can be very hard to collect, but it's a very small percentage of the roughly 3.5 to 4 million we levy. I could get you numbers if you wanted, but I don't think it's something that would benefit the town at all.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anything else on page 5?
So
On
it's
page
it's
5.
just the two on page 5, the senior means tested exemption and the collection of motor vehicles?
Yes, that's all that I have yet. I had 3 on page 6 that I thought would be something we would favor. The first 2, the local option taxes for restaurants and hotels, and then a double pole enforcement, of course. Although we're doing really well on that. I
Yeah,
think
but-
we're setting the standard on how to, how to get those reduced, but. Are there any others on that,
So the local option taxes, I mean, it doesn't look like a big jump, but what's the impact of that for us?
well, we do pretty well with, especially hotel right now.
Yeah.
Meals is going down a little bit, right, since before, or is it?
Yeah, it's doing okay, right,
Yeah.
it's doing okay, the, depending upon the quarter. The idea is it was, the local option came when the state raised the meals tax from the previously 5% to 6.25%. And then they gave the local option to do it 0.75%. So what they want to do is basically allow the community to, to tack on, you can see from 6% to 7%. So basically, that's the ability, what they're looking to do here.
But we don't have to.
Yeah, so it's the
It'll
extra
allow us to.
extra 0.25%, yeah.
So now, would that have to go through town meeting again to increase it?
Oh, I'm
Okay.
sure, yeah,
Okay.
they're not gonna let you do it just
Okay.
at the executive
Well, I
level.
thought since we already had that,
Right.
that already accepted the option before.
Yeah.
Okay.
Paul, does the bus procurement one have any bearing on us with our school systems?
Oh. Not that I'm aware of, I mean,
Okay.
I
Just
think we
asking.
know of one community, you have to be a community like a Concord and so forth to actually consider doing it
Okay.
in-house. That's symptomatic of a larger problem, which is the lack of competition in school bus. And that's because of the acquisitions and mergers of school bus companies without any state effort to, ensure that there's a viable market for it.
Okay, any others there?
What is the shared employees? When cities and towns share employees under intermunicipal agreements?
The conflict of interest law allows you to be
Right.
precludes you from being paid by two different municipalities, right?
Yep.
So this would allow you to share resources, I think is what they're saying.
It allows an employee of one city or town to take action consistent with the share of,
So is that,
Basically, what you end up doing instead is you have a lead community, like, when we share dog officer with Tingsboro, we're the employer, it's not a shared position. So what I think what they're trying to do is allow for shared employees in that type of an area, or if you were sharing an assessor, if you were a smaller town and so forth, that they wouldn't be one community owning it, and,
And then getting reimbursed.
Does that make it
Being
easier
reimbursed,
to have shared employees like that, or more difficult?
It depends on the situation, I mean, where, I think it really depends on a position.
But this
like
gives us
position.
the option
Right,
to
give
have
you
it
the option
shared,
on it
so,
on a case-by-case
okay. This is
basis.
good.
so is that something that? we
I don't think it's
would-
a high,
okay.
for a town like
We have a way
Chelmsford,
to do
I
it.
think it's probably
Yeah.
big out in the Cape or on
Right.
Western
Oh, yeah,
Mass and
right,
smaller
okay.
communities.
Okay. Then on the last page, obviously, the last one is something that we've been
Ugh.
trying to do something about for years.
Oh, the OPEB commission? you
Yeah.
mean? Yeah.
Yep. Can we ask John or Darlene if there's any we missed?
Okay. John, was there anything else that you thought?
Thank you, I don't see anything that would benefit us.
Okay, thank you. All right, so, I mean, I don't know if we need to take a vote, but if everybody's okay, I'll write a letter to our legislators and
Yep.
focus especially on those.
And then the
Should
only
we
other
all
thing,
sign it though, like?
either way, the only other thing that NIMCOG asked, today I was meeting with Chris and Kelly and the other managers from the areas, if we could send a copy of our letter to NIMCOG, because I think NIMCOG, perhaps as a council and as an entity, may also help support the Empowerment Act. So I think that's another good suggestion, is
Okay.
maybe a combined voice. Even though towns will have different ones, it can just say, we've heard from these different towns, these are some common and important areas, so.
Okay. Now, should we, copy the governor and,
Yeah, no downside to it, yeah.
yeah, And I don't know.
Same list we had with the ADUs.
The governor supports this, and if he says, yes, the governor supports this,
Maybe-
it's really the
Maybe more
legislature.
likely the Speaker of the House and the Senate President?
Yeah, they haven't been so enthusiastic, particularly on the local option taxes, if you've been reading
No,
some.
we should definitely include our local legislators
yes,
like we
right.
did before.
Yeah, that's who I was definitely gonna send it to, but, yeah. Okay, everybody's okay with that? All right, we will move on to town manager reports.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. 2 weeks from tonight, I'm be presenting you the final warrant, final draft, final to be executed warrant for the spring annual town meeting. This is my revised draft. There's some changes from the earlier draft, some of which I've written some brief memos about because they were notable, and some of them obviously caught some attention, as we heard earlier this evening. I'll just highlight the changes because we went over them one by one the other meeting, and I'll put you through that again. But one thing we did do in speaking with the assessors, and John Souza was here, and also with our finance director, and also with our veterans agent, Regina Jackson, we met recently with the Board of Assessors last week, and we've added a local acceptance for the increase the senior exemption by COLA. That's number 19, the clause 17F. And previously I mentioned to you about the 21I, which was to increase veterans exemptions by COLA. Again, as I mentioned earlier, and we were discussing, those exemptions have been in effect for many years. So if you have a $175 exemption, it's not worth the weight that it had back then. But we think even with the town's financial challenges, it's only fair to continue to provide some means of support for those in need infected by the increase in the property tax. So we're bringing forth those two companion articles for veterans exemption by COLA and also senior exemptions. What we are studying and we'll look further into is further providing additional exemption relief in the terms of the veterans ones. There is this multiplier that you can actually increase by 100%, up to 100%, the current the exemption with the COLA that you can provide to veterans, and then similarly on the senior exemptions, you can raise the criteria or cutoff for assets and income, and that could make more people eligible. But that comes with a cost. So we're working with the assessors to evaluate what those are, looking at what other communities similar to us and nearby to us are providing, and then what our budget can support in the years ahead. And so that's where we're going with this. And this is an important and probably long needed first step. So that's what's going on with the Article 19, again, addition, following in the wake of the veterans exemption is, geez, how do we not also provide those other people who receive exemptions, which generally tends to be seniors, surviving spouses, and so forth. Article 21 was submitted by the superintendent of schools since our last meeting. This is for foster care reimbursement. In order, the school district is eligible to be reimbursed for 10% of the cost of transportation for foster children. However, in order to achieve that, we have to, under the provisions of state law, adopt or approve the authorization of that. So that's what that article is. Again, it's just, I think the superintendent estimated the value is between $10,000 and $15,000 currently. And so again, why just leave money on the table if it's still available there? So that's what that article is. It's basically under the provisions of state law to adopt that. Article 22 is an article that I've submitted, and this pertains to the submission of the town manager's budget and the deadline for that. And what I pointed out is under the current scenario in the town bylaws, the charter speaks to the fact that the school department or school committee submits their budget 90 days prior to the town meeting, and that budget is supposed to be submitted to the town manager at least 90 days to enable the town manager to consider the effect of the school department's requested appropriation upon the town budget. But then the town bylaws under section 35.1 on the annual budget process says that I have to submit the budget and supporting documents 90 days prior to the spring session of the town meeting to the Finance Committee. Well, the 290 days don't allow for the consideration. And for years, and I've been here 18 years, when it was level service, level dollar, level staffing, it didn't matter, because it was just perfunctory. And, we've been to the tri-board meetings most years. It was, okay, we've heard what the Neshoba Tech's needs are. We heard what the Chelmsford Schools needs are. We heard what the town needs are. And generally, we think we can accommodate it, and it's fine. Well, as we saw this year, that's not the case. And I think as looking forward, that's probably not going to be the case for the short future. So what I'm asking is to provide a gap, or basically that I can consider the school department's request prior to the finalization of my budget, which I think is what the charter intended, and which I think is more critical and helpful now. The other thing logistically, and John can speak to this, the other thing that's logistically challenging with the 90 days for the manager's budget is the governor releases her state budget on the fourth Wednesday of January, and as long as it's not an election year with the new governor, because then they give the governor till mid-February. But on most years, the governor provides her budget the fourth Wednesday in January. This year was fine because there were 5 Wednesdays in January, so the fourth Wednesday in January was great. It enabled us to get our budget out in a timely manner. Next year, January starts on a Thursday, not a Wednesday this year. So it's not, the budget won't be released on the 22nd. It's going to be released on the 28th, which means I'm really technically supposed 90 days in, and I haven't even seen the governor's budget. And that's more common than not the way the calendar falls, because there's 31 days in January. So by pushing it back to the 10 days that I'm requesting, it provides us, the finance crew on the town side, into the beginning of February, so we would actually see the governor's budget, see the cherry sheets that accompany the budget, which come out the day after that Wednesday, usually in the afternoon, and then also see the school department budgets, and that way we can make a holistic decision on what the recommended budget of the town manager is to the finance committee, select board, and ultimately till town meeting. So that's what this article is about, and that's why it's coming up now, is because we are in a different scenario than we have traditionally been. So that's what this article is. It would just amend.
We didn't make the 90 days this year.
No,
And
no.
the school committee is never ready in
No.
January, so you're accelerating their schedule too.
Yeah, although I said to
that
Dr. Lang when we met
seem
last
fair to
Friday
her?
morning, I said, Dr. Lang, from my perspective, see, you can continue the same schedule and path that you're on. It's just, I'd like the ability to go to that school committee meeting when you hand out the budget on that Tuesday night, and then have time afterwards before I can make a final recommendation on a funding level for the school department and the whole town.
He'd have to be ready in January, and they never
Exactly.
start till February.
Right. But at least at least I could have something, because what I've also seen in recent
Even
years
if it's
is
a draft.
we've not seen the school committee deviate from the superintendent's budget.
Right.
But the whole point is I want to be able to see everything, and not just me. I'm not going to be the manager forever, but whoever the town manager is, I think the intent is, and I think the wise thing for the town would be, is that budget that's put out there should be holistic, knowing as much information as possible, i.e. what the governor is in state aid, and what all the departments are providing, including the school department, are requesting.
Or it
And-
shouldn't be finalized.
Or it shouldn't be
until
finalized.
Those other things are.
Because otherwise, well,
Yeah.
you can just imagine, and the difficulty is, and why that's important is, in a situation like we had this year where you're cutting services and/or people in positions, that matters. You don't want to be jerking people around, because they want to know, is this it? And believe me, I had to go through the building afterwards and explain to people, this is it, because the anxiety level was off the chart. Because people weren't sure, it's like, what's going on? Is this it? Is this everything? Because this is different than what we've customarily had. And so I think the fairness is, and the other thing that practically works, and again, with the current finance committee, is they generally don't meet until the second week of February. So, for example, the first FinCom meeting is this week, this Thursday, the 13th. So under this scenario, I would release the budget a week before, meaning the Thursday before, but it would also be the time for the packet for the select board that traditionally meets the second Monday in February as well. So in essence, it would be this, in my mind, the process would be the same for the manager. You release the budget, you put it in the select board's packet, you send it to FinCom, presenting to the select board on Monday night, and then that following 3 days later, presenting it to the FinCom. I just think that's the process, and I think also it's the intent of what the process should be. So that's what that article is. The next one is dog license fees and CO weights and measures fees. I've refined it from what we did before, but basically we're increasing those fees in light of the cost of providing services, and and particularly the CO weights and measures fees, since NIMCOG is no longer providing that service. The cost that will incur to provide that service. And again, it retains town meeting approval, so if we ever have to adjust them again, town meeting will have to vote them. So that's the revisions to 23 and 24. 285 Mill Road, I've placed this on as a zoning article request. And I did send notice out to you at the time through the packet as well as to the planning board. What that is the best way to summarize this, because I don't want to read to you the memo they wrote. This goes back to the issue of providing amenities in the 129 corridor. We've now had the zoning in place, and the only amenity we have out there is Press Cafe. And they're doing well, and it's worked. The problem is nothing has happened from them, despite the success of Press Cafe. Recently, where this came real clear to us is recently when the Lighthouse School vacated their space on 284 Mill Road, the owners, 285 Mill Road, the owners came and met with Community Development Director Evan Belansky and me, and talked about their difficulty of re-tenanting that property, much as we've seen difficulty in re-tenanting on 129. And their request is to rezone the property to allow for a standalone drive-through. Because right now our bylaw in the district allows for drive-through, but it can't be a standalone building. That's why Press Cafe is part of a larger building. But it would allow a place like Press Cafe to actually exist in a standalone building. And what he would envision doing at 285 Mill Road is tear the building down, and he showed us a sketchable plan that showed 2 standalone drive-through restaurants. And what you're really talking about is a Starbucks kind of an establishment, McDonald's type of establishment, Press Cafe type of standalone establishment. That's not allowed under our bylaw, even though our bylaw only allows drive-throughs on the main roads of Mill Road and Billerica Road in that whole overlay district, and only allows 3 such facilities, one Press Cafe being one. In talking to the community development director today, he thought even if it was 2 on one site, it probably would only count towards 1, not 2. But the bottom line is it would provide amenities into that corridor. Why that site, it would apply to any site in that area that I described along Mill Road or along Billerica Road from the town line to basically Alpha Road, and only on Mill Road up until Zoll. So it's a limited area that's defined already in our bylaw. Is this would allow drive-through standalone. And again, we have a cap on it. Also, the reason that they're looking to folks like Starbucks and the McDonald's Corp or something like that is the amount of capital that's required to take an existing building down and to rebuild a structure with a standalone. You need somebody with a long-term tenancy. They're not going to do that for a plaza or a small operator, because you just have to be able to go get financing. So that's what you're looking for. And at that site that backs onto the on-ramp of Route 3 and no neighbor abutters, why they're doing this is that's their market. They'll tell you 90+% of their traffic, they would pull off of the highway and would pull back onto the highway. And I just think it's an opportunity that they have met with the chair and vice chair of the planning board. they are aware that I will be discussing this with Evan on this Wednesday, and they're prepared to go and discuss it with the planning board later this month. And my sense is, I said in the memo, is I think it's something the town should consider to be reactive to the market that's out there. And if the answer is no, that's fine. But I just feel I have a responsibility to move this forward. And the select board will make its recommend, if it gets to town meeting, select board makes its recommendation, finance committee makes its recommendation, planning board makes its recommendation, and then ultimately town meeting would decide, do they want to allow this? I think it's transparent, and I think it's just reflective of what we have in the market. So that's what that article is about. I can tell you there's still some tweaks going on to the article, so what you see here probably won't be the final form. For example, they thought the size of the standalones, in speaking to the property owner today, was too big, as well as the seating is too much seating. So then actually they were actually trying to diminish the size of the establishments. And also the exterior appearance would be governed by the planning board. So as I mentioned, it could look like how they designed the CVS in the town center. And you've been in other towns, the Cape and other locations, where they build a facility that looks appropriate for the site. And the other concern they have are the operating hours. Right now, the operating hours are rather strict, 10 p.m. and so forth. And I think obviously they'd want that relaxed. They point out that, a lot of these places for coffee and that stuff are open 24/7. I'm not sure that's what we want there, but I think 10 p.m. it might be a little tough to get anybody to make that investment. So that's where that's what that article is on the Mill Road, 129 Barica Road corridor. And then the other one I have has to do with zoning, what I guess you'd refer to as the Maxwell's Agway site. And I want to read you an email, which I'm going to share with you, that I received this afternoon, because you've been receiving some correspondence with this. Evan Belansky forwarded me this message that was sent at 4:59 this afternoon from Lockheed Martin, Senior Operations Manager, and just because I want to explain to you how fluid this is, and also what their latest statement is, because I know different things have been said about what, and I'm not saying it's not true or not true, but what has been said at the meeting last Saturday at the Byam School and so forth. And just give me the indulgence of a sentence. Dear Mr. Belansky, we would like to take a moment to express our appreciation for the time and collaboration you provided us. Your proactive response to our needs has been truly valued, and we are grateful for the open dialogue. We are writing to express our interest in acquiring the property located at 24 Maple Road, which was recently listed on the market for sale. This potential transaction is in a very preliminary stage, and we are conducting internal business review and our evaluation, as well as preliminary environmental review, to determine if the site meets our needs and requirements. Although we do not have concrete plans of fully developed concepts at this time, we are excited about the potential opportunities this property presents. As a long-standing business in Chelmsford, we have always sought to operate in harmony with the surrounding area. We take pride in our reputation for being discreet and respectful of the village charm, as well as all of our neighbors. We intend to continue this approach to any consideration for future development or expansion. The current zoning of 24 Maple Road property, CB, which is the Maxwell site, offers additional options, but we believe that changing the zoning to limited industrial, IA, would provide us with the versatility to meet our needs and those of our neighbors, both in the near and long term. In addition to the zoning change at 24 Maple Road, we would also like to request the opportunity to rezone the existing parking lot at 16 Maple Road. That's the Lockheed Martin site, the parking lot, parcel 116-461-3, from neighborhood commercial, CA, to limited industrial, IA, for the same reasons mentioned above. We will keep you informed of our progress and appreciate your continued support and open dialogue throughout this process. Thank you again for your time and consideration. I've also heard from the owner of Maxwell's. They obviously support the IA zoning change. And now you can see Lockheed has not only thrown in the request for the Maxwell site, they're also their own site, because the zoning for their building is different than for their parking lot. Look, I don't know what's the right thing, but I know that I have a responsibility to inform you and the community of the request of a major employer that provides a presence in the community for decades, as well as high-paying jobs that I think any community would want and desire. And I would hate to be the person to learn one day and have to forward a message to you that they're moving 5 miles down the road to Westford in vacant space on Littleton Road or someplace in Westford. That's not a scare tactic, that's a reality. As I said in my memo, we've seen Mercury Computer leave this community, we've seen Kronos leave, and it's not out of the question that if their needs can't be accommodated, that they may leave. And maybe it'll happen any way or any day, or who knows. But the point is I think it's important to make the community aware of this request, to make you aware. It's more than likely that this won't be consumed prior to town meeting, and that I may make a request that there be no action on the article. But I think it's worth knowing, in the sake of transparency and awareness of the fluid economic development market that's out there. And so my intent at this point is, and the request is to move forward. I will incorporate the request on the zoning into the final form of the warrant. I will go, as I said earlier, to the planning board on Wednesday. I expect and understand that they will go to the planning board at the end of the month. And then we have 2 more months to see if this gets resolved in some form of another, in terms of whether there's a binding purchase and sale agreement or what have you. Or it also could be something that town meeting could take up at a later time. But see, that's the catch-22, is how do they do they would likely do a purchase and sale agreement contingent upon town meeting approval of a zoning change, because like any other development, they're not going to purchase that property without, they're not going to put their money at stake. And you can't just make it a parking lot, because that's not allowed by zoning either. So again, what we're trying to do here is, show a transparent form of what we're doing, allow the community, if it makes it that far, to make that informed decision, and also look at the council, because all this does is make the zoning change. Anything that were to get built on either of these projects would require a special permit and approval of the planning board, with legal notices of butters and final conditions for any project. But my sense was that if I didn't take this action in the draft, that I just don't want to look back and say, gee, I wish we could have, should have, would have, did we make people aware? Were we transparent in what was going on? And I think that's what's expected of us. And I can tell you that the feedback has been, as you can see in the letter and otherwise, has been favorable. I think that helps our reputation in the development community, because if you don't have a good reputation, then the opportunities are going to bypass you. You won't even know what you've missed. And then lastly, in terms of the Maxwell site, and speaking to the property owner, and I understand the property owner has a vested interest, the fact that the property sits there empty and vacant is because they've been unsuccessful to find a retail presence at that site. So again, going back to the other things, it's sometimes the market is telling you what exists out there. And no doubt in this case, the property's of interest because it abuts Lockheed Martin. But I think that's the reality, and we have to respond to that reality. Maybe it isn't at the end of April, but it's going to be sometime perhaps soon. And then the same thing as I said for the earlier article. So I'll stop there, and I appreciate your taking the time to listen to why the request has come, and what we're trying to do here. This is not trying to be disrespectful of the neighborhood or disrespectful of the planning board or any of the process. If there's one thing I've learned in 18 years and through some hard times, is be transparent, and be transparent early, because otherwise it doesn't go well. And because we don't want to be sitting here having other types of discussions of who knew what, when, and what, why. And so thank you for your time on this evening. And that concludes my review of any changes on the warrant, and I'll stop here if you have any questions on this or any of the other articles.
So I just want to make one comment. I really appreciated the memos that you included for the justifications on some of those articles. That was very helpful.
Thank you.
Anybody have any other questions?
Can I just ask a quick question on the
Please.
Lockheed Martin thing?
Yeah.
So the rail trail goes right between those
Mm-hmm.
two. So from a I don't know, is the rail trail like an easement?
Yeah.
How does that work? Is that an easement on one of the properties, or
Yeah, let me explain to, when they,
wouldn't be a continuously owned?
no, when they first came to us, they asked about air rights, and then who could we contact regarding air rights or easements through the rail trail or across or over the rail trail, because I think they were talking about a walkway, like you'd see at hospitals or other things. And we, in fact, Evan and I, we reached out to Representative Cataldo at the time, trying to figure out who we should be talking to. I think what's happened is their plans have evolved where what they would do now is they would expand on their current parking lot and then move their parking to the Maxwell, so you wouldn't need the expense and maintenance and unsightliness of a corridor air rights over the rail trail. So I think that sort of, I think, has waned, and we haven't heard any mention of that. What we're hearing instead is it'd probably be more cost-effective and more
on the
effective to
other
build on the
side.
other side. But the problem is there's also a zoning thing. The town is,
Yeah.
the zoning on that parking lot isn't the same as the building.
Yeah.
And not to mention the zoning at Maxwell's, which is different.
Yeah.
So that's the pieces to the puzzle.
So if it's just all industrial, then
Right.
they can kind of put
And
all
maybe at the end of
puzzles
the day, as
together.
Evan says, maybe at the end of the day, it becomes one of these things that we saw with the UMass West campus, of the project-based zoning, where you sign a development agreement and we go to town meeting. That might be the ultimate outcome, but I'm sort of trying to increase the transparency and bring the thing forward with the expectation that it probably won't, be ready to move across the goal line at town meeting, but I think moving the process along only brings a benefit, because in my mind, having dealt with this stuff, if they're already thinking of expansion, I think it's sort of sets off concerns that they're looking at all options, and that, I don't think it's just limited to Maxwell's. So that's why my sense of the urgency of making it public, transparent and public. So, thank you.
Paul,
Yes,
in the draft lighting bylaw amendment,
yeah.
who is the lighting officer, and can we fund it? Like, do we
I
have the
think
means to implement that?
I think it would most likely fall to the building commissioner, because we know we don't have means to fund the lighting officer.
Right.
What I'm hearing, the most recent revisions came from council, the end of last week, which is what you have in your packet, and it's going to be discussed at the planning board on Wednesday. My sense from Evan is this may not be, another one that may not be ready for Springtown meeting
Okay.
in the next 2 weeks, but it's going to be discussed this Wednesday. But yes, that is a concern, is who's going to do that workload. I think in the absence of anything, it would fall to the building commissioner, who would then become sort of this lighting officer with the light meter and everything else, much like he's doing noise and some of these other concerns. If there's no further questions, next on my report is the shared seal of weights and measures position with the towns of Tewksbury and Westford. As we've noted here in the past, NIMCOG is no longer providing this joint regional program. The effective way to do this is one, each town doesn't need a full-time person. And speaking to NIMCOG, which oversaw this program, as well as the State Division of Standards, which oversees the program, looking at our caseloads, they're confident that one person could do the 3 towns of Chelmsford, Tewksbury, and Westford. And so we'd be the lead community. In essence, we would sign an agreement similar that we do for dog officer and what we're doing for supporting of the Housing Authority for IT. And then, we would then execute, basically, we're going to execute a similar regional agreement to what NIMCOG provided, so that there's an agreement between the 3 towns. So that's where we're at, and most likely this would be the end of the revolving fund. What we would do is similar to those other things, is we would receive revenue, it's funded in our budget, and so it would come in as a local receipt as a revolving fund, but in essence, that's how it would work going forward. And that's why I had to adjust the fees, because what was happening with NIMCOG is they weren't collecting enough revenue to support the program, so that's why they saw the challenge of the fees, and when we price it out, we see the same thing.
So where it says that we would obtain and own the testing equipment,
Mhm.
is that going to be like a capital expenditure that we have to get town meeting to approve?
No, it's not that, it's not that expensive. We have funding in the revolving fund that can cover
So
the
we don't
cost of the
need those two
equipment.
towns to contribute
No,
to that?
no, that way
Okay.
we own it.
Right.
Because one of the things that's come up with the NIMCOG thing is, well, who owns the NIMCOG equipment? Yeah.
So is it possible to purchase some of what NEMCOG
I
has?
was just going to say, are they going to have
Yeah,
tag sale?
everybody's got their hands on it.
I'm sure.
So we'll.
Maybe whoever
we'll
goes
look at it.
first.
Yeah. And then the last one, why Darlene's here, is the approval for the 3-year financial audits. I'll let, Darlene's been patient, I'll let her come and speak to the
Should've
board
taken
about
it out of
this.
order.
Good evening. Yeah, we reached out to CLA just to see if they were willing to sign another contract with us. I didn't really see a reason to bring in another firm. There's really not a lot of firms out there now, and now some of the firms are actually starting to combine, like Powers and Sullivan. They've sold off now. It's actually, they've been bought out by 2 firms in the past year, so they're not even, Powers and Sullivan really doesn't list, they're under a new name. And I think that both John and I feel that Clifton Larson, they've done a great job. So we did reach out to Matt Hunt, who was our partner with them, and we told them we'd like to go ahead and sign, and if the board is comfortable with that, we would just change partners in the firm. Would just bring somebody else in. He's comfortable with doing that, just to have another set of eyes from his firm, but it would be using the same firm. Their cost is they went up a couple $1,000s more, which is very reasonable. We feel that but both John and I have been happy with them. We didn't really see, it's a lot of work. If we had to change firms again, that upfront work for the firm and for John and I you have to do a complete data dump of all of our general ledger. It's just a lot of work for the firms. Again, they have all our information already. They would just bring in another partner to do the next 3 years audit.
Okay. Any questions for Darlene?
No.
So we do need a vote on this, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we have a motion, Mary?
It's not an authorization, it's just a motion and approval.
Approval of the,
I'll make a motion to approve the 3-year financial audit proposal from CLI as presented.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Okay. 4-0.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
and then the last item this evening is a notice that we received from our current town council, KP Law, that they're raising their fee for legal services by $10 at the start of the upcoming fiscal year. So have that information for you. Obviously, that's an annual appointment that will occur, later this spring.
Okay. All right, so we are on to member liaison reports and referrals. George, anything? Aaron, Virginia?
Just 2 things. The strategic plan has reached its next draft form. Charlene from Barry Dunn spent a lot of time with the committee after getting all the environmental scans and staff input. And Paul sent that out today to the department heads, and Charlene will be going through another iteration with them with their feedback. It'll come back to the committee, then it will go out for public comment, come back to the committee, and then come back to the select board for adoption.
And probably the April, May time, May
Oh, okay, that's what,
May
Yeah.
time, right,
yeah, so another.
So they're on track for their 1-year schedule that they proposed.
Good.
So.
Okay.
And then the second thing I have is the Vinyl Square Committee is meeting on Thursday, and one of the major things on their agenda is to review the draft Freeman Lake Diagnostic and Management Assessment. That effort began in 2023, and the draft analysis is done. The town is trying to get the copy of that, and when they do, it'll be posted on the town website, but you can get to that place from the public announcements on the homepage right now. So when it's available and you want to see the document, it's there. And that meeting is going to be actually at the school administration building, and it's also available by Zoom if people want to join in a hybrid manner.
Okay, that's it.
That's it.
Okay, the only thing I have is earlier today, we have a new lieutenant on the police force, Lieutenant Dan Gogan. He was prior a sergeant, so congratulations to Lieutenant Gogan for his promotion to lieutenant. And with that, one more motion.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you.